It's summertime, which means cherries are in season, and cookouts, picnics, and barbecues and outdoor gatherings have begun. This is the perfect time of the year to impress your friends with a delicious cherry pie containing a golden, buttery, flaky crust topped with a beautiful lattice. And while this may look like it took a lot of time and effort, it's actually a very easy yet tasty pie recipe. So let's go ahead and get into how I make cherry pie. Let's go ahead and begin with our crust. Right here I'm measuring out 12 ounces of all-purpose flour on a food scale. When it comes to baking, I really want to make sure all of my measurements are precise. I don't want to eyeball anything, and I want to make sure I'm using exact measurements. Now this first step can be done with a food processor, or if we don't have one, we can just use a box grater like this. I'm going to grate 2 sticks of butter. These sticks must be frozen. I prepped my butter by throwing it into the freezer the night before. The reasons we want frozen butter is, for one, it is going to be much easier to grate, and 2, we really want our pie crust to be as cold as possible. Letting this butter warm up will allow it to combine with our flour too well, and we'll lose that light, flaky texture we are looking for in our crust. Warm butter is one of the biggest ways we can screw up this crust. I'm dipping my fingers into the flour, and I also decided midway through to drop my butter and coat it in that flour so that my fingers would not stick to it. As I was grating, I could feel the butter beginning to warm in my hands. So every so often I would change my grip on the stick of butter. I would also mix my grated butter into my flour mixture with my hands periodically, just so that we don't have a giant pile of butter building up in the middle of our bowl. Cheese graters and mandolins are probably the leading cause of all kitchen injuries in the world, so once we start grating towards the end of our butter stick, do not risk grating off a fingernail or a knuckle. Just go ahead and throw that last piece into your mixture, and we'll just go ahead and break that chunk up with a fork later. Grated fingernails and knuckle skin will not be a part of this pie recipe this time. Once my butter is all grated, I'm going to give this a stir with a fork. Since I noticed a lot of big clumps of butter, I decided to go ahead with my fork and press down and break up any of those big clumps into small crumbs. Once my mixture looks something like this, I'm going to add the last of my ingredients. Right here I have a mason jar of ice water. I'm just going to measure out 7 tablespoons of ice water. It's important that our water is cold because, again, we want to make sure that our mixture is as cold as possible. Next, I'm going to add some apple cider vinegar, and last but not least, I'm going to sprinkle in half a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to stir that all together until my dough starts coming together like this. Once we can start forming our dough like this, I'm going to pour that all out onto a work surface and start forming it into a ball. Once our dough is formed into a ball, we are going to wrap that in some plastic wrap, and then we are just going to pop that in the fridge to rest for at least 30 minutes. While my dough is resting, we can prep our cherries. This is a super simple mixture of pitted cherries, cornstarch, sugar, and lemon juice. All of my measurements will be in the description box below. I also decided to add a little bit of lemon zest, but this step is optional. I give that all a really good mix until all of my sugar and cornstarch has completely dissolved in that cherry juice. We do not want to see any powdery coating left over. Now that my cherries are prepped and my dough has rested, it's time for pie assembly. I'm first going to divide up my dough into 2 halves. 1 half for the bottom crust and 1 half for the top crust. Once rolled out to a sort of circle, I check to make sure that the dough is about 1 inch bigger than my pie pan. Then I just roll that over my rolling pin and carefully place that bottom crust into the pan. Next, I roll out another sort of circle for my top crust. I am going to cut this circle into strips. How thick or thin you want to make these strips is up to you. Now that my lattice is ready to assemble, I'm just going to put my cherry filling into my pie pan, making sure to scrape out all of the juice out of my mixing bowl as well. Now let's start weaving. I'm just going to fold over every other strip down, place a strip perpendicular to those, and fold those strips back up. And for the next placing of a strip, I'm going to fold down the opposite strips that stayed straight up for the last application. and then place another strip perpendicular to those. And I am just going to keep repeating this same pattern until my pie is covered. For the final step in this assembly, I'm just going to tuck in those loose ends and start crimping my edges. Now I'm just going to brush my top with some kind of dairy or egg wash, and this is what will give us that beautiful golden crust. Now that we're all assembled, let's go ahead and pop that into a preheated 350-degree oven for about an hour and 15 minutes. And after our timer has gone off, we should be left with something that looks this bubbly and gorgeous. Now this last step is extremely important, but maybe the hardest step in this entire recipe, and that is that we have to wait. I know it is tempting to just cut a slice and dig right in, but we really need to let our filling set. If we don't let this pie cool down, we risk our pie filling oozing out and deflating the entire pie. I actually prefer this pie refrigerated and served cold, but room temperature is just fine too. So my pie is cooled down and I am ready to go ahead and cut out that first slice. And as you can see, our filling is staying put. A good pie filling really does need to hold its shape to ensure that each slice is uniform and has the same exact amount of filling. Anyways, this was a super fun recipe to make for my friends and family, and I hope you give it a shot and enjoy making it as well. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.